Romans chapter 13. All right, Romans chapter 13, and last time we, starting in chapter 12, we get into some very practical things. Paul's just talking about good Christian living and various responsibilities we have as New Testament believers, and this chapter is no exception to that. Very practical, very down to earth. If I could encapsulate it with one thought, it would be this: proper motivation for doing right, and the chapter gives you three different angles or perspectives for that. Number one, why do we do right? Well, we want to be mindful of the law of the land. We have a responsibility toward our civil leaders and authorities, and we don't want to get in trouble with them. We'd rather be free than be in prison. So why should you do right? Stay out of prison. Verses 1 to 7. Verses 8 to 10, another motivation for doing right: love fulfills the law. So I want to stay out of trouble, but I also want to be obedient, and the best way to do that is to just love. See, I'm concerned. I don't want to break any laws. Do I need to learn every single law that has ever existed? No, not necessarily. Just love your neighbor, and in so doing, any good and right law, you are going to fulfill it. And then verses 11 to 14, light for the last days, and maybe you could shrink that to just say the last days. It's a motivation for doing right. We're closer to the Lord coming back. As I prayed at the beginning of class tonight, Jesus might come while we're here, and I want to be found doing something right. So that's a good motivation to always be doing something right. I remember when I first got saved, my pastor used to talk to us about that quite a bit. Honey, I'm sure you remember Brother Freddie mentioning that. We'd be praying together, chatting together, and he'd say, wouldn't it be great if Jesus were to come while we're out there witnessing and handing out tracts? Now, I must admit, that would be one of the most powerful witnesses ever. Sure. Hey, you want to get saved? Boom! And they're left there with a tract. What? Get saved! That would get their attention, right? Or, we'd be praying, and my pastor and I, we'd be on the floor together, and get down on our faces and praying, and he'd stop for a minute, and he'd look up at me and he'd say, "Brother Mike, wouldn't it be great if Jesus came back while we're praying?" And I go, "Yeah, that'd be good." And he said, "All right, Lord, please come back." And he'd go right back to praying. It's like his mind took a break for a moment just to think about that. And he would often talk about that. So it's always been on my mind. I want to be found doing something right. And the best way to do that is to be always abounding in the work of the Lord. Then you stand a great chance of that. So good motivation to do right. So chapter 13 and verse 1, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. So all positions of authority go back to God. They originate with Him. Up in heaven, there is an authority structure. There is a supreme authority. The word that we use for that, I'm talking just humanity in general, is sovereign. The biblical word for that is almighty. He's in charge. The buck stops with Him. But under Him, there is an authority structure. It's not just chaos under there. Under Him, you have, when you get into the angels and all the created beings, right? God's obviously at the top of that, beyond all of that. But then within time, Jesus submits to that. Jesus humbles Himself and goes under the authority of the Father. But then into the created beings, you have Michael the archangel, right? So he's high up there. I would think that the cherubim and seraphim, they're probably above the angels even, the way it's described in heaven. So whatever the case is, the spiritual entities in heavenly places are referred to as principalities and powers, which is an authority structure. So the same way heaven is structured, that's how God also built humanity and built civilization, we are to have authorities to keep things running smoothly. So the command here is to be subject unto the higher powers. Now that goes all the way, you can go up through the civil authorities as far as humans are concerned, up all the way to God sitting on the throne in heaven. To be subject to that. There's no power but of God. Now we're going to talk in just a moment. There are times in the Bible where God puts a particular man into a particular position. And there's a broader way to think of this. The powers is not just the person, but the office. So make sure you recognize the difference between the two. The office is a powerful thing. Whoever is occupying that office, whoever sits on the chair in that office, deserves a certain level of respect and fear, and we're going to see in a moment how to treat that person. But beyond the person is the authority that goes with the office. Right? So sometimes God does put a particular person there, and sometimes not. And I think sometimes people get a little confused here, and they assume if a person has authority, it means God put him or her in that position. Not always. It's a mistake to think Ramaphosa is appointed by God. Maybe, I'm not saying no, but you'd have to go to some lengths to prove that. To say that God put Biden into it might be a judgment on America. I mean, you never know that God does that sometimes. So actually, let me show you some verses about this. Come to Exodus chapter 9. All right, so at the least, if we just approach this in a general sense, God is the one that established a power structure in the world, an authority structure. So in that sense, all powers are of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. God has set it up that society is to be governed in this way. But then we can even get more specific with the individual. So Exodus 9 and verse 16. And by the way, while you're finding that, I wrote it out here. Various authority structures. Now you can make subcategories to this, but 4 different branches of this. The civil, this will be your mayor, your president of the country, stuff like that. The policemen, armies. And then familial, within the home, you have a structure. You have the head of the home, the man, and then the woman, and then the kids come into that. Servile, at work, you have the master-servant dichotomy there. And then ecclesiastical, which is just the big word for church. Within the church, there's an authority structure as well. All right, so Exodus 9 and verse 16. The Bible says, God speaking, and in very deed for this cause have I raised thee up, talking to Pharaoh, for to show in thee my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. So just because the person is in a position of power doesn't mean that God is rewarding him for being some good guy. In this case, it's the exact opposite. Pharaoh, you're such an awful guy, I'm putting you in a position so that I can make an example of you. Look at Isaiah chapter 41. Isaiah chapter 41. And let's get verse number 2. Isaiah 41 and 2. It says, who raised up the righteous man from the east, called him to his foot, gave the nations before him, and made him rule over kings. Now, phrased in a question, but he gave them as the dust to his sword, and as driven stubble to his bow. He pursued them and passed safely, and so forth. Now, what he's getting at is God is saying, I'm the one that put that particular king in that position of authority. You can't deny that I've done this. And in this case, he's actually talking about Cyrus, the Persian. And there's other places in the book of Isaiah that references that, Isaiah 44 and 45 and a couple other verses as well. So God can certainly take credit and does take credit for putting this man in this spot, but not always. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 8. Sometimes the people choose the person. Now, obviously, God can step in and disallow that, and he can move things around if he so chooses, but not always. 1 Samuel 8. You understand, so in one sense here, because God is the one who created the need for an authority structure and created that office to govern whatever needs to be governed, we can say that God is responsible for the authorities because he created an office that needs to be occupied. But it's going too far to say God always chooses the person to go into that office. So yes, God's responsible to some extent because the office exists, but the officer, that's a different story. 1 Samuel 8 verse 5, The people approached Samuel and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. So they're saying, Samuel, you take care of this for us. Verse 6, But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. Samuel prayed unto the Lord. The Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people, in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. So here, see, God is allowing it, but he's saying, let the people have what they want. In verse 8, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. So you're feeling the sting of their lack of appreciation, etc. Verse 9, Now therefore, hearken unto their voice, howbeit, yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Samuel then becomes the worst campaign manager in the history of campaigning. And he stands up to the people and says, Listen, guys, the king that we got for you is the absolute worst. He's going to raise taxes. He's going to abuse you. He's going to mistreat you. He's not going to care about you. And the people go nuts. Yeah, we want him. It's the weirdest case of reverse psychology ever. It's awful campaigning, but it worked. Look at verse number 17. Here's Samuel wrapping up his campaign speech. He will take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. He's gonna steal your sheep. Take this from you, and you're going to be his slaves. Verse 18, And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye have chosen you. So you see who's responsible for putting that man there. Yes, God allowed it, but God says, give the people the one they want. And the Lord will not hear you in that day. Verse 19, Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battle. So they said, yeah, we hear you, but we don't care. We want that king anyway. Anyway, I'm going to stay out of making political jokes because we could be there a while, but that's just awful. Look at Hosea chapter 8. Hosea chapter 8. Now, I think I could show you a good handful, maybe 5 or 6 other places like this, but this will suffice. Hosea chapter 8 and verse number 4. Hosea 8 and verse 4. God says here, They have set up kings, but not by me. I mean, that's pretty clear, right? They did this. They put those kings in those spots. I didn't do that. They have set up kings, but not by me. They have made princes, but I knew it not. Of their silver and their gold have they made them idols, that they may be cut off. So these people were setting up authority figures, not just civil, but even spiritual. They were creating idols and calling that God. So that's stealing away the Almighty, the sovereignty of God in that sense. A couple of verses that go along with the authority structure. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, God told Adam and Eve at this point, have dominion, subdue everything and have dominion over it. So God commanded them to have authority. And then familial, you have Genesis chapter 3. In verse 16, God tells the woman that your desire will be to your husband, he shall rule over you. The servile wasn't there in the garden as of yet, but that comes in later. It's all through the law. To be honest, I think I can kind of encapsulate all of this. Ecclesiastical, there's Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. Servile, you can get Ephesians chapter 6, verses 5 to 9. But then, what am I doing with me? Romans chapter 2, verse 15. It talks about the work of the law written in your hearts, your conscience also bearing witness, in the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. So the way God has built society is because we all have the same work of the law written in our hearts, we are able to keep each other in check. We are able to accuse or excuse one another by saying, wait a minute, there's something in me that says what you're doing is right and wrong. And eventually societies form from this because somebody has to hold wrongdoers accountable. There has to be a system for that. You can't just going around with a term I learned in Malawi, mobile justice, where people just exact vengeance anytime they want. As soon as you let a society go into that and say, I think you've done wrong to me, therefore I'm going to punish you. I'm going to be judge, jury, and executioner. If everybody's allowed to do that, everybody's going to die because it's just going to get crazy. So you have to have some structure there. All right, back to Romans 13 now. Romans 13. All right, so let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. As Christians, we are not accepted from this. We can't say, well, because we're saved and the politician in charge of our community is lost, therefore we don't have to submit to that. As Christians, we recognize that it's not the person occupying the office necessarily, but the God that created the authority structure. We want to honor that structure. Verse 2, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, the authority, resisteth the ordinance of God. All right, an ordinance is a way of doing things. God is the one who set it up. Resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now, guys, let's not get carried away. That doesn't mean that if you run a stop sign, you're going to hell. All right? Do you see how people could get a little weird with this? Yes, okay, it's wrong to break the law in any capacity, but when it says damnation, even this Greek word that is translated as damnation is this. That's how it looks in Greek, which if you were to spell that out into English, it actually has the hyphen there. Let me put it in English words, English letters, crime. So this is K-R-I-M-A, krima, which is where we get the English word crime. So they receive to themselves crime. So there's crime, there's punishment. You're going to become guilty of breaking law, and you're going to get punished for that. Verse 3, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Right? May I say that this is the general rule? I know that when corruption sneaks into any political system, any civil authority, when it becomes corrupt, then this gets turned on its head. And then they can begin to persecute those that are doing good. And that happens all the time. But the general rule is this. Rulers are not there to scare you out of doing good, but to scare you out of doing bad. He says, wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. That's the way it's supposed to work. You do right, and those in charge should recognize that and reward you appropriately. Verse 4, for he is the minister of God to thee for good. Right? That position was created for your good. It is there to give structure to society so things run harmoniously and people know where the boundaries are and what to do, what not to do, etc. Now, be careful in this phrase, minister of God, because that is the same phrase we would use for a pastor, right, or a preacher. He is a minister of God, but in a different way, right, in a different capacity. This guy that we're talking about in verse 4, let's say a policeman, he is a minister in the sense that he is fulfilling a God-ordained purpose, but not the purpose of being in a pulpit and communicating the Word of God. But nevertheless, it is an office that God has appointed, and there is a God-ordained reason for it. So he is a minister of God, but to a different capacity. He's not busy trying to do something spiritual or religious, but civil, right? The civil, something that helps the community. Guys, use this whenever you're out and about, maybe get pulled over. This is a good chance to witness. Because, to be honest, it's very different. Here in Africa, just in general, South Africa as well, but up in Malawi, Zambia, Mozambique, everywhere I've driven, I've come across this. We don't have checkpoints like you guys have. In America, we don't have that. So when we got here, when we moved to Malawi, every 10 minutes I'm getting pulled over. And stop, yes, I want to see your license. But what did I do? I want to see your license. But because in America, you can't just ask to see my license. You can't do that. There has to be a reason for that, but not here. And we're going to check your tags. But Why? They're out of date, you pay us money. Okay, but you pulled me over. You didn't even know I did. In America, that's illegal. You cannot pull somebody over for no reason. There has to be a legitimate, I have to have done something wrong, then you can pull me over, then you can check whatever you want. But you can't just, so when that started happening to me, I thought, oh, no. I'm taking you to court and you to court and you to court. Oh, I had that all backwards, yeah. And they found so many things wrong with my vehicle. They were making stuff up. I know they were. Those were some thirsty cops, right? Because they wanted Fanta and Coke and Cocopina and all kinds of stuff. I mean, one guy said, I learned I had to carry cash with me in my car because it's just the system. It was wrong, but they would not let you leave until you had paid the fine right there. They called it a spot fine. You guys have heard of such things? No? Well, you will. Spot fines. So you had to pay your spot fine, and man, it got wrong. But the guy would pull me over, and he'd say, okay, your sticker on the bumper, the reflector is not right. I get out and say, but the reflector's right there. And I have two, because the last time I got pulled over, they said, you have to have two, so I have two now. He said, no, but you see, this one, it is this thick. No, it's not right. It should be like this. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. No, but you must pay spot fine. Oh, that just wears me out. So I started doing something different with them. I say, hey, you know what? We have the same job title. Like what? You're a minister, I'm a minister. We're both ministers of God. Here, let me show you. I open up my Bible and say, see there? Minister of God. So you know what that means? You're working for God, I'm working for God. And because we're working for God, we need to do a good job the way God wants us to. No lying or cheating or stealing. Okay, you may go. It works, eh? It works. All right, so more than just getting yourself out of a ticket, it's a good way to get a conversation going about the Lord, right? You're talking to somebody with some authority. Hey, I want you to know you're doing something that is in line with the will of God, and I thank you for your service to the God that I worship. And then, they're going to start asking, what do you mean? Boom, take them right here, and then get a conversation about the gospel. Right? He is the minister of God to thee for good. Verse 4, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. So here's the guy that is able to execute punishment and judgment. He's not holding on to that sword for no reason, in vanity. It's there to accomplish a purpose. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So he is there to do something that God has set up, and that is an evildoer deserves to be punished. Now this verse does support the idea of capital punishment, even putting someone to death. Now it's not limited to that. I mean, back in the day, I don't know if it happened here, but we have some people in Malawi that walk around, they don't have a hand. I've met people that don't have either hand. And it's because back in the day, if you got caught stealing, your hand came off. And in Islamic nations, it's like that even today. That's one of the judgment. Even in the Quran, it says you're supposed to do that. So it does fall in line. Now, I'm not here to try to straighten out everybody's legislative issues and how they punish crimes, but that person has authority to execute some sort of wrath. All right, so in that sense, we should be mindful of the laws and stay away from doing wrong. Now, verse 5, wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath. All right, so it's not only because I don't want to feel the prick of their sword, but also, verse 5, but also for conscience sake. I don't want to feel the prick of the sword, nor do I want to feel the prick of my conscience. Right? So even you could do something wrong and the police didn't catch you. I'm not even going to ask for a show of hands. How many times you've broken a traffic law and never even thought about it? I'm right there with you, right? Because I needed to get home, amen. But how many times has somebody done something wrong and think, well, nobody caught me, and that's the last they think of it. But listen, you know you did something wrong. Now, I must admit, traffic laws are a little bit different than like violating somebody else's privacy or stealing or murder. I mean, those things are, right, those are different categories. not saying it's right to violate traffic laws. I'm just saying it's different. But if you have stolen from somebody, I mean, you know, you broke in the house, you stole. Maybe you didn't get caught, but your conscience caught you, right? I mean, so I know some of these smaller little issues, maybe that doesn't bother you, you don't think about it. But if you have broken some laws, if you didn't pay your taxes, we're going to see it in verse 7. You're supposed to pay them taxes. Now, if you know you went out of your way to cheat on your taxes and you lied, hey man, maybe no one caught you, but your conscience caught you. So Paul's saying stay in line for two reasons. You stay out of trouble with the government, you stay out of trouble with God, because your conscience will get you if the policeman doesn't. Verse 6, for this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Now the key word there is continually. Because this is his full-time job, he doesn't have a chance to go farm. He can't work in the field. He can't work some other job to generate income. He is performing a public service. Therefore, the public needs to pay him. He's working for the public. So this is a fair trade. He's providing something for the public, in this case with the policeman, protection. So the public should pay his salary. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I can't help but say it. Whew, it's a little tough to pay the taxes. You still should. But it gets tough to pay the taxes when the policemen are not providing a necessary service, or when the municipality is not providing the bare necessities of services. I'm not talking above and beyond, just the bare necessities. And now you bring into, and I think we all feel this to a certain extent, you have to pay other private organizations to provide security, to provide services, whatever that might be. And now you do start to wonder, why am I paying taxes plus paying these private contractors? Sure, so if anybody from the government is watching, please make it easy for us to pay our taxes. Provide the service, right? Because that's how it works. You provide something for the public provides something for you. But it's up to the first one to provide something, and then the public would react. But this is why we're supposed to pay tribute and customs and taxes, etc., however you'd like to word that. All right, they are supposed to be continually attending to the public's good. Verse 7, render therefore to all their dues. Tribute, to whom tribute is due. Custom, to whom custom. Fear, to whom fear. Honor, to whom honor. All right, so tribute and custom, because, right, every country is going to define that a little bit different. I think of these as placeholders for customs fees, taxes, levies. There's all sorts of different designations, perhaps, on their books that they would use. Whatever you'd like to call that. I remember in Malawi having to pay a lot of taxes and customs because people would ship stuff from America. And, okay, I know these verses. The guy at the customs office doesn't, but I know them. So I'm going to pay until, wow, it gets out of hand sometimes. So I got a package one day, and I mean, the worth of the package, I can't remember exactly, but what the contents of the package, let's say, was $100. Now, you're supposed, the way the law was written, you pay a percentage, the resale value of what's in the box. And that makes sense to me, because otherwise I could just get stuff for free from friends and family and start a business without having paid any tax. So I understand. I don't want to undermine what's being made in Malawi. The contents worth $100. The guy says, all right, you need to pay the equivalent of like $300. And I said, whoa, I'm sorry. What are you saying? And I thought surely he gave me the wrong number. I said, no, Bambo. What's in the box is not even worth this. I'm supposed to pay a percentage. He said, no, we've changed the law. Now, when they say that, I automatically think, show me the law. Because I think you just changed it 5 minutes before you walked out with my box. That's what I think. But I said, okay, what's the new law? He says, you have to pay a percentage of what's in the box plus a percentage of the postage that was paid to mail the box to you. I said, I'm sorry, you want me to pay an extra tax for the amount that it costs to ship it to me? I said, Bambo, that means sir. I said, sir, I cannot resell the postage. Why would I pay customs on that? He said, it is the law. I thought, oh man, I said, okay. Now I knew the law. I thought I did. the one that existed before that trip to the customs office. I said, sir, if I understand right, if I don't pay for this package, if I don't pay the fee within so many weeks, you have to ship it back. Is that correct? You have to ship it back to this sender in America. Right. I said, and who pays for that? You? He said, our office does. I said, okay, ship it back. And he realized right then, oh man, this is going to cost us money. A lot of money, because that was a lot of postage. I said, no, ship it back. I don't want it. He said, it's okay, pay the fee. And he gave me the real fee. I said, now I see what's going on. It pays to be clued in every now and again to some of those laws. But nevertheless, okay, I may not like how much the tax is, and we can debate that all night long, but still, the principle is there. There is a reason that things are set up to pay taxes and customs fees on goods received, and there are reasons for that, and we need to be mindful of that and submit to that. Now, at the end of verse 7, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. I would maybe sum this up by saying show the appropriate respect to these people in authority. But I will break this into twofold, or two maybe separate thoughts here. I've already mentioned it. You have the office, and then you have the person occupying the office. Show an appropriate amount of respect for the office, whoever occupies it. But then if the person occupying the office is doing a worthy job, then show him double honor. Does that make sense? And I'm getting that from 1 Timothy 5, where an elder who labors in the word and doctrine is worthy of double honor. So there's the office within the church, but that doesn't mean that the man occupying the office is doing a good job. You can be a pastor without being a good pastor. But if the pastor is a good pastor, then there's fear and honor. I reverence, I respect the office, but I also appreciate the good job he's doing. So I think that could be twofold. True of policemen as well, or any politician. All right, verse 8, owe no man anything. Oh, man. We'll park there just for a little while. Pay your bills. Amen. Just write it out next to that in the Bible. Pay your bills. Owe no man anything. Now, I have heard some preachers go to this and say it is wrong to take out a loan. Because if you take out a loan and you have to pay it back incrementally, right, like you're buying a car or a house, then you're violating this because you owe the bank or that person or that loan shark, or don't do that. you owe somebody, so that's wrong. Right? If you have, and guys, in the Bible, see where there are cases where you can borrow large amounts of money and pay it back incrementally, it's little by little. So that's not wrong or sinful. But when you agree upon a payment schedule, for this month you owe X amount of rands, then do not go beyond that agreed upon time, because now you owe him something outside of that month. And pay the bill on time according to the schedule. So that's how you would stay in line with verse 8. All right, so owe no man anything. I will say, even though I don't want to get carried away, I don't think it's wrong to take out a loan. I do think it makes a lot of sense to not make a lot of purchases by borrowing money. Try to stay away from credit cards as much as you can. Now, there is actually a way to use credit cards to your advantage if you can pay the entire balance every month, right? Because then you don't gain the interest, and you find some credit cards that have awesome point systems, and you can actually make some money if you work the system correctly. And it's all above board, nothing corrupt about it. So there's a smart way to go about that. But guys, the more you buy on credit, making these massive purchases, you bury yourself in debt, hoping that everything in the world stays stable and that the stock market is just right and that you never lose your job and you don't have the car doesn't break down, nobody gets sick. If you set up your budget based on fairy tales and wishful thinking, and if everything works out right, when's the last time you ever saw somebody get to December 31st and go, yep, this year everything worked out right? Have you met that person? I haven't met that person ever in the history of the world, right? So that's a rare thing. Just plan on some things going wrong, and therefore be smart about your finances. Stay away from debt as much as you can. All right, owe no man anything, but, one exception, but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. All right, so there's one bill that will never be fully paid. I owe you my love. Right? I owe you love. Now, why do I owe you love? What have you done for me lately? Right? Why do I owe you love? Because Christ loved me. My love for you, the debt I have towards you, is based on the love that Christ had and has toward me. So Paul said in Romans 1, I am debtor both to the Greek and to the barbarian, to the wise and the unwise. I owe you something. He loved me that much, so my love for you is going to be ongoing. No matter how much I love you, there's never going to be a day where I say, okay, I've loved you enough, I'm cutting you off after this. No more love. Could you imagine if Christ said that to us? Okay, I've loved you up to now, but you've had enough love, no more for you. Well, thank God His love doesn't come with a limit like that. Now, it does come with some conditions, right? He can manifest His love differently depending on how we behave, but the love is always going to be there. And that's the same thing. We're always going to be in that sort of debt to one another. All right, verse 8, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. And then Paul's going to go into verse 9 and 10 and explain that a little further. For this, which is a way of introducing an example. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, so summing it up, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. All right, so let's say it like this. If you love your neighbor, you will not sleep with his wife. Adultery. If you love your neighbor, you won't steal from him. If you love your neighbor, you won't lie to him or about him. If you love your neighbor, you will not covet what he has, but rather you'd rejoice that he has been blessed with that thing, and you'll be content with what you have. And then there's the etc. part of this, and anything like that. You simply will not attempt or seek to do dirty to your neighbor in any way. You rather seek to be a blessing to him. Verse 10, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. All right, so we can go back into the Old Testament. You have this set up. When you read Exodus to Deuteronomy, you find 613 laws, ordinances, precepts, statutes that were given to Israel. Now, if you wanted to sum these up, they fit into let's say 10, first of all. 10 different laws. Sum all of these up. And that's where we have the 10 Commandments, right? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Have no other gods before me, no graven images, and so forth, all the way down to thou shalt not covet. Those trickle into 613. Now, if you wanted to sum up these 10, there's 2. And when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment of the law? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like unto it. Now, how is it like unto it? The fact that love is involved. Love your neighbor as yourself. Right? So, love God, love your neighbor. You know what you have in the first 4 of the 10 commandments? They're all commandments about loving God, an individual's relationship to God. The last 6 commandments refer to the relationship between a man and his neighbor. So, love God, love your neighbor. Here are 10 examples of how to do that, and 613, all the little, T's and C's apply, all of that down to there. So Paul makes it simple for us, thank God, and says, guys, if you want to do your neighbor right, just love them. If you're loving them the way God told you to, you're not going to be doing anything wrong. All right, verse 11, Paul now branches into another motivation for doing right. And that, right? So that you see that junction there. And that, he's switching into another topic. Knowing the time. Now, even you can go into the Greek word behind this, but the English will do just fine for this. Knowing the time, he's not referring to it's almost 8 o'clock. Right? That's when he says knowing the time, he's not looking at his watch. This word is knowing the era or the period. We might use the word dispensation, that type, knowing the age in which we are in. and that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. All right, so when he says it is high time, I've drawn, I'm sorry if this is not great, but this is my best attempt at an hourglass. All right, did you know that by looking at it? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I say, I'm not an artist, but that should be clear. So the way that this hourglass works, and this is where the phrase high time comes from, you tip the hourglass over and the sand begins to trickle down. Now every hourglass is built for a particular purpose. Sometimes it's a 1 minute counter. It can be an hour, it can be a day. I mean, it depends on how big the hourglass, but I mean, hourglass, you would say it's an hour, but whatever the size is, you tip it over, and when all the sand runs to the bottom, time is up. So it is the medieval, Siri, set a timer for 5 minutes. It's that thing. I'm looking at my iPad, seeing if it heard me there, but wanted to shut that off real quick. But that's the ancient way of doing that, is you turn the timer over. Now, as the sand drips down, you see there's not much left here, but the sand is building up. And the more that the sand comes down, this pile rises and rises and rises until it is full. And now this is high time. So that's where that phrase comes from. It is high time. And we still use that to this day. It's high time that you figured this out, that type of stay. They're saying you've had enough time. You should have figured it out by now. All right, so he says that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. Let me see if I can preacherize this. Guys, there's no more excuse for living like the world. There's no more excuse for living a dark, wicked, sinful life. You should know. You have enough information to look around at what's happening in the world, compare it what's in the Bible, and you should know that we are getting very close to the Lord coming back. There's no excuse for not knowing that. Just look at the time. You can see the sand hitting the bottom of the glass. We're getting there. Okay. Now, guys, when Paul wrote this, how much sand was in the bottom of the glass? He said it's high time. So where does that put us right now? I mean, there's 2 or 3 grains of sand left up here. You might get 5 or 6 more breaths in before we go. I mean, we are at the tippy top of the high time. Now, when he says at the end of verse 11, now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. Remember, salvation does not only apply to your soul. There's also, when the word salvation is used, we can be referring to the salvation of your body. And when Jesus comes back, we're told in Romans chapter 8 that your body gets saved. We're saved by hope and that whole thing, the redemption of our bodies. That's what he's referring to here. Now, simply by the virtue of time, right? I mean, 1 second after another, yes, we're always getting closer to the rapture. We can't stop that. That's obvious. But that's not the only way to know that we're getting there. So if you were to take the calendars off the wall and throw all the watches away, throw away your concept of time, just look around at what's happening. There is a moral decay, there's political decay, there is spiritual decay. So the churches are running down, apostasy is happening, and this stuff is happening more frequently. And that's what we're told in the Bible, that in the last days iniquity shall abound. There's always been sin. But as the last days come upon us, we're told that evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. So all of these problems within society, yes, they're going to continue, but get much, much worse as the last days come upon us. And that's how we can see. It was bad when Paul wrote it. It's especially bad now. Who knows just how bad it's going to get? Our marching orders stay the same. We see the time. Our salvation's getting close, that is of our body. So let's stay away from sinful living and the worldly life. Let's put on the armor of light. So verse 12, the night is far spent. The day is at hand. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. Right? How is light some sort of armor? Well, if you don't have any light, right, you're going to stumble through the darkness. If you have light, you can see what you're doing and where you're going. And if your enemy doesn't have light, they have no idea where to hide, if they're safe, if they're not. So having light to shine on your path prevents you from stumbling and allows you to actually navigate. Do you guys remember this story in Judges chapter 7? Gideon was told by God to go and fight the enemy, and he had 32,000 soldiers. And God said, that's too many. Which if you're the general of an army, you're going, what? I have too many soldiers? How can that be? And he said, I'll shrink it down for you. And, you know, Gideon attempted to negotiate a little bit. Can we just send, maybe 20,000 home? Can I just stay 10,000? No, that's too many. It's too many. He said, okay, bring them down to the water. And the people that drink the water like this and like that, those are the ones you want. He ended up with 300 soldiers. 300 that passed the final test. So now this was his great idea. Put a trumpet in one hand and get an empty pitcher in the other and put a lamp inside the pitcher. And when you see me, give the signal. Everybody just do what I do. We're going to blow the trumpet, break the pitcher, and let that lamp shine. And they divided up into 3 companies, 100 in each company, surrounded the enemy, and blam! They broke those pitchers at the same time, and they all shouted at the same time, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And of course, all the enemy thinks we're completely surrounded because there's 100 men here. But with the light shining, you don't know that it's just 300 men. That light shines. That could be 3,000 men. It could be 30. You don't know because that light goes farther than you do. So that light actually acted as armor and caused the enemy to flee. And so putting on the armor of light, the best thing you can do is put on righteous behavior. And that makes a statement to say, not only to the people around you, but to the devil as well. To say, this is my plan. I'm not going to hide. I'm going to go on the offense. And I want to live right. I'm not just going to cower behind the shield of faith and never try to live out my faith. I'm going to let my light so shine before men that they may glorify God and so forth. All right, so he says in verse 12, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. I have officially run out of boards, so let me borrow a little bit from over here. And I've run out of marker as well. Okay, so this timetable that you guys have seen, once or twice. Shame, my timetable's falling down there. All right, so this, what we call the church age, in the Bible, that's a nighttime. This is a nighttime. Because Jesus, when he was on the earth, he said, I am the light of the world. Yes? Malachi chapter 4, verse 2. The Bible calls Jesus the Son of Righteousness. S-U-N, capital S-U-N, the Son of Righteousness. And he shall arise with healing in his wings. That's Malachi 4, verse 2. Now that verse is actually a reference to this over here. But Jesus as the light of the world, pictured or typified by the S-U-N, the Son, when he goes away, right? The Son has gone away. When the sun is hidden, you are in a period of night. Does that make sense? And that's why it is right to say this is nighttime. You know what? I'm going to extend my circle a little bit because the nighttime actually extends all the way until Jesus comes back over there. All right. So that's nighttime. Now, one day, Jesus comes back. The S-U-N of righteousness arises with healing in his wings, and he appears again. But right now, we're in the night. Now, he says, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. So, if Jesus is typified by the sun, and we are in a period of nighttime right now, we, right, are typified in the Bible by the moon. The church, and I say we as the church, as saved people, when you read about the moon in the Bible, you're very often reading about the church. And it makes for a very interesting narrative as you go through Scripture. I showed you a verse the other night out of Psalm chapter 19. It was talking about the S-U-N, the sun. It is like a bridegroom that is a strong man that runs a race across the sky every day. And I told you how it tells a story. It rises up and it's very strong, and that matches Jesus doing his miracles and making this very strong statement. And then as time goes on, as the sun begins to set, it turns blood red because Jesus is on a cross and he's dying and he's whipped and the blood is shed. And then when he dies, he's buried. And when Jesus was on the cross, the sun got hit and it went dark, and now he's going down and he's buried. But then shortly thereafter, he arises up, and that's a picture of a resurrection. And every morning, every day, the story starts again. But it's telling an even bigger story. I gave you the small version. There's a bigger version. It's telling a prophetic version. That after Jesus runs the race, remember that while Jesus is away, the moon is here. Now the moon has no light of its own. The moon is reflecting the light of the sun. So what are we supposed to do? Put on verse 14. Verse 14. Put on, we have no light of our own. We have to get it from somewhere else. Put on the Lord Jesus Christ. He is the light of the world. So then we shine forth His light. While He's gone, we represent Him. We are ambassadors. And we want to properly represent Him while He's away. But we're not going to be here forever. Eventually, we're going to disappear. Eventually, the moon goes away. But it's not long after the moon goes away that the sun comes back up. Right? Now, I say goes away out of view. It never completely ceases to exist. It just goes out of view for a while. And then so every day you're getting an even bigger picture of prophecy. And there's always a greater light that rules the day. I'm quoting Genesis 1 verse 16. The greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. So we are to have some authority on this earth. We have been authorized by Christ, commissioned by Christ to speak on His behalf. We have been sent out in the stead of Christ to beseech people to be reconciled to God. Take your Bible, look at a verse or two with me if you would. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 33. I'm just going to give you a short little snippet of this. I'll let you do your own deep dive later on. I've already given you Genesis 1, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. That matches Christ and the church. And by the way, you'll see this in Genesis as well, where a husband and a wife is referred to as a sun and a moon. Do you guys remember this later on in Genesis? Remember that when Joseph has the dreams? And he has this dream about the sun, moon, and stars, and Jacob and his wife, they knew. Jacob knew, oh, you're talking about me and your mom and your brothers. So this whole idea of the husband and wife being the sun and the moon, that's a constant theme in the Bible. So Christ loved the church, gave Himself, that's His bride. So it makes sense, right? Deuteronomy 33, look at verse 14. This is more like these are preaching curiosities. I don't want to make you think that Deuteronomy 33:14 was written to talk about the church, but it is one of those things you can make a connection. Verse 14 says, "And for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon." So one is brought forth, one is put forth. Did you know that the moonlight actually does add nutrients to crops? It's necessary for crops to get moonlight as well as sunlight. Both kinds of light offer something to the crops, and they need both. So Jesus, of course, as the sun, He's going to be able to add something to those crops, but there's also a need for the moon to kick in and do its part to bring forth the fruit. Look at Joshua chapter 10. Joshua 10, verse 12. "Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day." Couple things I'd point out. And again, guys, I'm going deep. We're getting into allegorical stuff, and you could run with this for a while, but when the sun stands still, so should the moon. right? The church never should run ahead of Jesus. We should stay lockstep. If he stands still, we stand still. If he's waiting, we wait. When he moves, we move. As long as the sun's moving, we're moving. And by the way, the sun's still moving. Right? So we go. What's the command? Go. Go where? To the uttermost part of the earth. You track the sun and see where it goes tomorrow. Look at it. You know, if you look at it close, you know where it's going to go? It's going to go as far away as you can see over the horizon to the uttermost part of the earth. That's where the sun goes. So you know what the moon should do? Follow that. Right? Okay, look at Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon. I can see some of you, this is more than you've heard before, but look at Song of Solomon. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you noticed it back in Joshua, but the words sun and moon were capitalized. I just want to point that out. Almost as if they're personified, because it's Christ in the church. I don't think that's going too far there. Song of Solomon 6, look at verse 10. This is Solomon describing his wife. Now listen to this. Solomon describing his wife. Somebody help me. Solomon is a picture of who in this book? Christ. And his wife is a picture of? The church. Verse 10, who is she that looketh forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun? Why? Because she's supposed to put on Christ. So within the wife you see a bit of both, which is right. And terrible as an army with banners. Now, I'll leave out tonight why Solomon looked at his wife and thought, sure, terrible as an army. That's a whole other Bible study. But prophetically speaking, we're the army, right? Revelation chapter 19. So there's a lot you can dig out of the Bible once you understand this whole prophetic timetable. We're in the night. We are the moon. We're reflecting the light of the sun. We chase him constantly. That's what the church is supposed to do. We're chasing our bridegroom until one day we stand still. And we get, okay, but let's come back to Romans chapter 13. We can just go with that. Let's finish this up in verse number 13. All right, so the day is at hand, so let's get dressed properly. We want to meet the Lord covered in light, not in darkness. Verse 13, let us walk honestly, as in the day. All right? What does he mean, as in the day? Right here. As in the day. As if we were here already. What will our situation look like over here? Jesus will be here. We will physically be in his presence. Walk like that. So tomorrow, everything you do it as if Jesus is physically standing there right next to you doing it. David did that. Psalm chapter 16, the Lord is ever, did he say before me? I put the Lord always before me. So he lived his life in the presence of God. That'll keep you out of a lot of trouble. That's part of walking honestly. Because the honest truth of it is, he never leaves you nor forsakes you. He is always there, right? Now when he says live as in the day, yes, prophetically we're looking at that situation. But also there are so many naughty things that go on at night that people do because no one else can see them doing them. They would not dare do those same things publicly in light of day while everybody's watching. I think that's maybe the immediate, very practical thing Paul's getting at. But there is some prophetic things because in verse 12 he did mention that. So both ways we're getting the same lesson. If it's something that you would be ashamed of and embarrassed to do publicly, probably do that. And then he gives some examples. As in the day, not in rioting. Now we would say partying. A riot in this sense is a party. Not in rioting and drunkenness, which you know what that is. Not in chambering. The Greek word behind chambering is koite, which is where we get the word coitus, which is a fancy word for sexual intercourse. Chambering is when it's the renting a room for an hour. That's chambering. A chamber, let's say kamer, that's chamber. So it's just going into the room for an hour. That's what he's talking. You don't do that. And wantonness. Wantonness, this is when you have no restraints at all. You say, I'm just going to do whatever I feel like doing and give in to all my pleasures. That's wantonness. Not in strife and envying. Right? So I'm not going to stand around fighting with people, arguing with people, and trying to prove that I'm better than somebody. That's a waste of a life to try to, as they say, keep up with the Joneses. Verse 14, but put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. All right, so we talk about this often, conforming to Christ's image and his becoming more like him. Can I give you one thought on that real quick? Galatians 5, remember the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace. That is a description of Christ. So perhaps sometimes you get stuck with, okay, conform to his image, but what exactly does that mean? How can I become more like him? Just break it down. Love, joy, peace, are those things present in you? Gentleness, goodness, meekness, faith, temperance. See, am I accomplishing those things the way Jesus would? And this is where you reading the Bible and knowing how Jesus reacted under certain circumstances help you know, am I getting any more like him? Put on the Lord Jesus Christ, make not provision for the flesh. So, simple way to think of this, starve the flesh. I don't mean like physically, I'm not telling you have to fast the rest of your life, but starve the sinful nature. You don't surround it with things that fuels it, it will eventually give out. Right? Now, when you wake up tomorrow, you're going to have to redo that. But crucifying the flesh, putting it up there, and not constantly taking it something that it wants, it's going to get weak, and then you can find victory. Okay, we've covered this tonight. Any questions on Romans chapter 13? Anything? All good? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. 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 That's correct. She was deceived. Yes. Now you're saying that Eve we don't know if she influenced the man, but we're not told a lot about that. But Adam was not deceived. He knew what he was getting into, yeah. But God did choose the man to be the head of the home, and it does stem from what happened in the garden, yes. Yeah, there I can't tell you. I don't know. I mean, I can make educated guesses. You know, she was created after Adam. And guys, please be clear on this. This is an educated guess. I can't prove this. But she was not standing there when God originally said, don't eat from that tree. You can eat from all the other trees, don't eat from that. As I understand the story, Adam was there, God told that to Adam. Adam then communicated that to Eve, and perhaps the devil, knowing Eve got this secondhand, thought that she would be easier to deceive because she didn't hear it straight from the mouth of God. But I can prove myself wrong on that, because there is room in the story to understand that maybe God came back at another time and told Eve herself, listen, Eve, here's what I told Adam, here's the rules, here's the boundaries. So I'm going to have to admit a decent amount of ignorance on that. All I know is how it happened. I can't tell you exactly why. So, good. Yeah. Go ahead.
So another question is regarding our bodies getting saved.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say a person is saved and then maybe they are devoured by an animal,
Mm-hmm.
and they never find a name,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or some people get cremated.
Sure.
So how do the actions go out? Are the actions like saved?
Now, the new body, our new body, is reserved in heaven for us. But let's say my new body is in heaven right now waiting on me. So if I were to be eaten by a shark and there's nothing left of there's actually always something left of you, right? Matter just, it can change, right? Well, it's true. I mean, you're going back to the earth one way or another. Oh, do you need further explanation? All right. You're going to fertilize the earth one way or another. But the new body in the day of the rapture, it comes down and swallows up whatever was there. And if there's nothing to be swallowed up, if it was eaten or destroyed, then the new body simply comes down and houses the soul, and the spirit. So at the end of the day, we are left with the new body having completely consumed whatever was left of the old body. Yep.
So that means the verse that says the dead are going to rise first, it's not going to apply to them.
No, it very much applies to them. Yeah, the new body comes down and swallows up that corruptible body, whatever corpse is there. Yeah, if there is one. Yes, sir.
I just have a question regarding Romans 2, verse 50.
Okay.
You said that all four of those authority structures, it sums them up or something.
It affects, this verse plays a role in all four, because your conscience, right, no matter which category we're talking about, I'm able to tell if the person over me or the person under me or the person on my level, like let's say in this one, other employees, are you doing a good job or not? Just based on the conscience, I'm able to make those judgment calls. From this, if you were to start just with a room full of people that have a conscience, we will eventually end up with this. You'd have to, because here we are talking about you're right, you're wrong, oh, what you did was really wrong. Now how do we fix that? How do we prevent that? Then we're going to come to the conclusion somebody has to have checks and balances. We have to set up some laws so that everybody knows where the boundaries are and here's the punishment. So just this leads to that. Yeah, good. All right, let's head to the house. Brother Garrett, you want to close us in prayer tonight, please?